When I walked into my childhood home with my father's secret family during Victoria's high society fundraiser, everyone watching realized that my stepmother had been lying to all of them for years. She had spent years ensuring I would be left with nothing, never suspecting that my father had already prepared for her betrayal with evidence and a secret video will. Before I reveal how I uncovered my father's double life that saved my inheritance, subscribe to Nexus of Revenge for daily stories of justice that will satisfy your craving for perfect karma. Now, let me take you back to where this all began, when the sound of new locks being installed on my family home first showed me what I was dealing with. Every Sunday, for as long as I could remember, Dad and I would have dinner together in his study, surrounded by his art collection. The smell of his favourite bourbon and the crackling fireplace created a sanctuary where we could talk about anything. My father, Howard Winters, wasn't perfect, but he was my anchor. After my mother left when I was 8, it was just the two of us until Victoria came along. As an art therapist working with traumatized children, I'd developed an eye for the details people try to hide, the small gestures and expressions that reveal what's beneath the surface. This skill would later become my greatest weapon against Victoria's web of lies. Victoria would occasionally join our Sunday dinners, her designer perfume always slightly out of place in that warm, lived-in room. She'd married my father 4 years ago, and though she tried initially to build a relationship with me, there was always something calculated about her affection. As if she was checking off a box. Bond with stepdaughter. 3 months before Dad died, Victoria started interrupting our Sunday dinners with urgent phone calls. I noticed how Dad would tense up when she mentioned his Chicago business trips, and how she'd rifle through his desk when she thought no one was looking. Victoria was in your study again, I told Dad one evening as we examined a new painting he'd acquired. She was taking pictures of your documents. He sighed deeply, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Some people need security more than others, Natalie. Just leave it be. Dad's study always remained locked when he travelled. The one room Victoria wasn't allowed to redecorate or even enter alone. What was he protecting in there that she was so desperate to find? The last time I saw Dad alive, he pressed a small key into my palm and whispered, "If anything happens, Abigail knows what to do." I didn't understand then how those words would save me when my world collapsed. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Dad had died of an aneurysm while on his business trip to Chicago. Victoria sobbed dramatically on the phone, but something felt rehearsed about her grief. Within hours, she had taken control of everything, the funeral arrangements, the estate paperwork, even my father's personal phone. "The funeral home needs your input on the casket selection," I said to Victoria the next day. "I've already taken care of it," she replied, not looking up from her laptop. Howard and I discussed his wishes extensively. "He never mentioned final arrangements to me," I said, suspicion creeping into my voice. Victoria's eyes flicked up, cold and assessing. "There were many things Howard didn't share with you, Natalie. He was protecting you from difficult realities." After the funeral service, exhausted and heartbroken, I drove back to my childhood home to find the locks changed. Through the bay windows, I could see Victoria inside, already removing family photos from the walls. My stomach dropped as I realized I couldn't even retrieve my toothbrush, let alone my father's belongings. I pounded on the door for 5 minutes before Victoria finally answered, her face a careful mask of composure. "I need to get my things," I said, fighting back tears. "The estate lawyer advised me to secure the property," she responded, blocking the doorway. Her eyes were dry, her voice cold. "You can collect your things next week. I'll have them boxed up for you." Next week never came. Instead, a newly drafted will appeared, leaving everything to Victoria. Dominic Reynolds, our family attorney for 20 years, delivered the news with downcast eyes in his wood-panelled office downtown. "Your father updated his will 6 months ago," he claimed, sliding the document across his desk. His voice didn't ring true, and he wouldn't meet my gaze when I questioned the authenticity of my father's signature. Meanwhile, Victoria had already listed the house for sale and was auctioning Dad's art collection, pieces he had specifically promised would be mine someday. When I called to protest, Victoria's brother Theodore answered her phone. "Natalie, you need to accept your father's wishes," he said smoothly. "Victoria is the executor and beneficiary. Continuing to harass her will only result in legal consequences for you." What happened next shocked everyone who knew my situation. Victoria didn't just lock me out. She escalated in a way I never expected. 3 weeks after Dad's funeral, I parked across from my childhood home, homeless and nearly broke after paying for a portion of the funeral Victoria had insisted on upscaling. Through a heavy rainstorm, I watched as Victoria hosted an elegant dinner party inside. My mother's crystal glasses caught the chandelier light as Victoria served wine to people I'd known my entire life. That night, sleeping in my car, I saw movement by the house's rear entrance. Victoria's staff were emptying what looked like old belongings into the dumpster. When they left, I searched through the soaked items, finding my childhood teddy bear, the one Dad had given me after Mum left, torn and discarded like trash. Something inside me hardened as I clutched it to my chest, rainwater mixing with my tears. What I didn't know as I sat shivering in that car was that Dad had left me something Victoria couldn't touch, a truth that would turn her perfectly crafted new life upside down. And the first clue was about to find me. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Coffee shop on Maple, 2 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone. Abigail." Dad's secretary of 20 years had always been kind to me, but we'd never been close. Curious and desperate, I met her at a small cafe far from Victoria's usual haunts. "Your father knew this might happen," she whispered, sliding a storage unit key across the table. "He made preparations." That moment, feeling the cold metal of that key, was when my grief crystallized into something else entirely. For the first time since Dad died, I felt a flicker of hope. "What is this for?" I asked, closing my fingers around it. "Howard kept certain things separate from his main estate," Abigail explained, her eyes darting nervously to the door. "Things Victoria doesn't know about. He made me promise to get this to you if anything happened to him suddenly." The storage unit was in an industrial area across town. Inside, I found meticulously organized filing cabinets, a coded ledger of payments spanning 25 years to an address in Chicago, photographs hidden inside business documents, and a letter in Dad's handwriting. "Natalie, if you're reading this, I've failed to set things right while alive. Victoria isn't who you think she is. Neither am I. The truth will hurt, but it's yours by right. Follow the payments. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you everything face to face. Know that I always loved you. Fuss. Dad." Dad wasn't just protecting his own secrets, he was protecting mine. Sitting on the concrete floor, surrounded by his hidden files, I realized I had a choice. I could accept defeat, or I could fight back with the truth, whatever it might be. I created a detailed timeline of Dad's Chicago trips, cross-referencing them with Victoria's suspicious behavior and the ledger entries. Each payment corresponded with a major life event: birthdays, graduations, holidays. Using my therapy training, I developed a profile of who might be receiving these payments and why. The payments had gone to the same address for over 2 decades, starting before I was even a teenager. The amounts increased over time, with larger sums coinciding with what appeared to be educational expenses. I needed answers before confronting Victoria, and I needed leverage to reclaim what was rightfully mine. While investigating the Chicago address, Victoria's brother Theodore called. "Natalie, Victoria mentioned you've been asking questions about your father's business dealings," he said, his voice artificially concerned. "As your uncle, I'm worried you're heading down a destructive path." My heart raced. She was tracking me somehow. Later that night, I noticed a tracking app had been installed on my phone during the funeral when Victoria had borrowed it to call the florist. I purchased a new phone the next day, leaving the compromised one at home to throw them off my trail. Family betrayal cuts deepest because it comes from those who should protect us most. If you believe some actions deserve consequences, tap the like button now. It helps others find these justice stories and lets me know you want more, like this one. 2 days later, I stood outside a modern glass and steel building in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. The address from Dad's ledger belonged to a sleek condo. I pressed the intercom button for Unit 703, my heart pounding against my ribs. A man's voice answered. Yes? My name is Natalie Winters, I said. Howard Winters was my father. Silence stretched for several seconds before the door buzzed open. The man who greeted me on the 7th floor looked startlingly like my father, same jaw, same eyes, same way of standing with weight shifted slightly to one side. The shock on his face when I introduced myself told me everything. He was my half-brother, and he had no idea about me either. I'm Wesley Cooper, he said, inviting me inside with visible confusion. The apartment was minimalist and tasteful, with several abstract paintings that echoed my father's aesthetic. Howard was your father too. He visited every month my entire life, Wesley continued, pouring us both much-needed drinks. I thought I was his only secret. My mother never married him, but he supported us completely. Together, over the following hours, we pieced together a staggering reality. Not only was Wesley my half-brother, but through him, I discovered our half-sister Lily in Milwaukee. Dad had maintained 2 separate families for decades, but neither Wesley nor Lily had received any inheritance notification. He told me he was planning to make things right, Wesley said, showing me recent text messages from our father. He said he was putting everything in order because he didn't have much time left. This revelation changed everything. Victoria claimed he changed his will 6 months ago to leave her everything, I explained. Wesley's expression darkened. That's exactly when he was diagnosed with his condition. He knew he was dying, he said. He was putting affairs in order, not cutting you out. He specifically told me he was making provisions for all of us. You might be wondering how I felt discovering my father's double life. The truth is, I was hurt, but also relieved. Hurt that he'd kept such secrets, but relieved to find family when I needed it most. This wasn't just about money anymore. Victoria had manipulated a dying man and was erasing his legacy piece by piece. The power dynamic had begun to shift, though Victoria didn't know it yet. Just as we were building our case, Victoria accelerated her plans. She scheduled an estate auction for the following week and filed restraining orders against me for harassment. Theodore warned me privately that she'd found prescription medication in Dad's study that could be used to suggest he wasn't of sound mind when making any previous wills. She's moving quickly, Theodore said, surprisingly nervous on our call. She knows something's up. Why are you telling me this? I asked him. I didn't sign up for what she's doing, he admitted reluctantly. I thought this was just about her securing what Howard promised her, but she's gone too far. We were running out of time. Wesley used his tech skills to recover deleted emails between Victoria and Theodore discussing how to handle Natalie if she discovered Howard's Chicago situation. The emails revealed Victoria had known about Dad's second family for months before his death and had been quietly preparing to erase all evidence of his other children. Meanwhile, I reached out to Dominic Reynolds with our findings. To my surprise, he asked to meet privately at a hotel rather than his office. Your father asked me to play along with Victoria, he admitted, producing a video Will Howard had recorded shortly before his death. I've been gathering evidence of her financial manipulation this entire time. On the video, Dad looked thin, but determined. I, Howard Winters, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous wills. I divide my estate equally among my 3 children, Natalie Winters, Wesley Cooper, and Lily Peterson. To my wife Victoria, I leave only what was specified in our prenuptial agreement. Why didn't you show me this immediately? I demanded. Your father instructed me to wait until you found Wesley and Lily on your own, Dominic explained. He wanted you to understand the full truth before proceeding. And I needed time to document Victoria's actions after his death to build a stronger case. Victoria's fundraiser was scheduled for Saturday evening, an elegant charity event designed to establish her as a grieving widow amongst Boston's elite. She'd transformed our family home into a showcase for her new life, with Dad's memory carefully curated to serve her narrative. She never expected me to arrive with Wesley, Lily, and both of their mothers, Dad's secret families now united. The security guards she'd hired recognized me from family photos and let us in, assuming we were invited guests. As we entered the grand foyer where I'd grown up, the familiar space now felt alien under Victoria's redecorating. Guests in formal wear sipped champagne beneath the chandelier my grandfather had installed. Victoria stood at the centre of a circle of admirers, wearing a tastefully subdued black dress that still managed to look more expensive than anything else in the room. The moment she saw me, her glass froze halfway to her lips. When her eyes moved to Wesley beside me, the unmistakable resemblance to my father evident to anyone who had known him, her composure finally cracked. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed, approaching us with a fixed smile for the benefit of her guests. "Family reunion," I replied calmly. "Exactly what Dad wanted." As Victoria gave her tearful speech about honouring Howard's legacy through charitable works, Dominic connected his laptop to the main projector that had been set up for her presentation. The room fell silent as Dad appeared on screen, looking directly into the camera. "I'm recording this as insurance," he began, his voice steady despite his obvious illness. "I've recently been diagnosed with a terminal condition, and I'm concerned about what will happen after I'm gone." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Dad explained his split estate plan and directly addressed Victoria's manipulation. "I made provisions for all my children," he said. "Victoria knows this, though. She's counting on no one finding this recording. She discovered my previous relationship with Rebecca Cooper and my ongoing support for our children, Wesley and Lily. Rather than discussing it openly with me, she has been systematically preparing to erase them from my legacy." The change in Victoria's face as she realised all her careful planning had unravelled, from confident socialite to cornered fraud in seconds, was everything I'd imagined during those nights sleeping in my car. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the naked panic that washed over her features. "This is preposterous," she sputtered, looking around desperately for support. "Howard was heavily medicated when this was filmed. He wasn't in his right mind." "Actually," Dominic interjected, "I have signed statements from Howard's physicians confirming his mental competence at the time of this recording, along with documentation of changes made to his medication after you gained access to his prescriptions." Theodore, who had been standing near Victoria, stepped away as if to physically distance himself from what was unfolding. The crowd began to murmur as the video continued, revealing Victoria's systematic efforts to isolate Howard from his children in his final months. Victoria was escorted from the property as guests whispered among themselves. The carefully applied makeup streamed down her face, revealing the panic beneath her composed facade. Her social humiliation was complete. The very circle she'd been so desperate to impress had witnessed her unmasking. Dominic immediately filed for an emergency injunction to stop all estate sales and presented the authenticated video will to the probate court. Within 48 hours, Victoria's access to all accounts was suspended pending investigation. "She's been served with papers," Dominic informed me the following week. "The forensic accountants have already documented substantial financial misappropriation starting months before your father's death." Evidence of Victoria's financial crimes emerged quickly. She'd been siphoning money from Dad's accounts for months, forged signatures on property transfers, and even tampered with his medication to make him more compliant. Theodore, faced with potential conspiracy charges, turned state's evidence against her. The woman who'd locked me out of my own home now faced criminal charges and social ostracism from the very circles she'd been so desperate to impress. When I returned to the house, Now legally under joint ownership with my newly discovered siblings, I found Victoria had already stripped it of valuables, but she'd missed the hidden safe behind my father's favourite painting. Inside was a journal detailing his double life and his growing suspicions about Victoria's intentions. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before his death, read, "I've set the wheels in motion. If I don't survive to make things right, I've left Natalie enough breadcrumbs to find the truth. Victoria underestimates her. A mistake I nearly made myself until it was almost too late." The most surprising outcome wasn't the restoration of my inheritance or even Victoria's downfall. It was discovering my extended family. Wesley, Lily, and I formed a bond that helped us understand our complicated father. He wasn't the perfect man I'd thought, nor the abandoning father they'd sometimes resented. He was deeply flawed, but had tried in his own way to care for everyone he loved. He never missed a single birthday, Lily told me as we sorted through photographs in the study. Even when I was angry at him for keeping us secret, he showed up. He always said he had a complicated situation, Wesley added. I resented the secrecy, but now I understand he was trying to protect all of us in his own way. In his final months, knowing Victoria would betray me, he'd created a path for us all to find each other. The key Dad had pressed into my hand led not just to the storage unit, but to a safe deposit box containing personal letters to each of us, explaining his choices and expressing regrets he couldn't say in person. My letter began, "Natalie, by the time you read this, you'll know the truth I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I was a coward in many ways, but know that you were never a secret. Wesley and Lily knew about you, even if you didn't know about them. I kept you separated not out of shame, but because I feared losing any of you if the complicated truth came out. As for Dad's locked study that Victoria had been so desperate to access, it contained not just his art collection, but documentation of her previous financial frauds that he'd discovered during their marriage, the leverage he'd used to ensure she'd never harm me while he was alive. Your father knew exactly who Victoria was," Abigail explained when the three of us took her to dinner to thank her for her role in preserving our inheritance. "He married her anyway, thinking he could control the situation. It was only when he got his diagnosis that he realised how vulnerable that made you. Victoria ultimately accepted a plea deal for financial fraud, avoiding a lengthier sentence but forfeiting everything she'd tried to steal. Theodore disappeared to Florida, disgraced and unwelcome in the social circles he'd once navigated so confidently. 6 months after that night at the fundraiser, Wesley, Lily and I gathered in Dad's study, now restored to its original state, to divide his art collection among the three of us. We decided to keep the house as a shared family property where we could all gather during holidays. He would have liked this, Wesley said, looking around the room. All of us together, finally, Lily nodded, raising her glass in a toast. To Howard Winters. Complicated, flawed, but in the end, he got it right. I thought about the long journey from that rainy night in my car to this moment of unexpected family connection. To Dad, I agreed, and to justice delayed but not denied. If my story showed you anything, let it be that changing locks can't secure buried secrets. Victoria never imagined my father had prepared for her betrayal through the family she tried to erase. When someone discards your memories like trash, sometimes the sweetest revenge is returning with the truth they feared most. Subscribe to Nexus of Revenge for daily stories of calculated justice, and share with someone who needs to remember that being locked out isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a reckoning they never saw coming.